Yeah, hi. Right, good day to you all. Got my English teacher mug here. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at the discourses that are being presented in slides 29, 30 and 31 on the slideshow. So this is preparation for exactly what you'll do on the English language paper 2, section B, where you're kind of deconstructing the language of discussions and debates about language in a couple of texts. So let's have a look at the first one and let's blow it up so it's full screen. Here we go. And this is an extract from a piece of journalism by John Humphreys, he of Mastermind. And the headline of it is, "I hate text messages, how texting is wrecking our language." So very, very heavily prescriptive headline put forward there with some humour as well, because ironically he's using text message language himself. For example, he uses a number homophone there on the hate, and he's using non-standard spelling as well, where he omits the vowels in that particular word. So he's drawing upon the discourse of text messages in his attempt to criticise it. And he's very strident in his viewpoint that this technological innovation is actually damaging our language. So let's get into the passage itself. "It is the relentless onward march of the texters, the SMS short message service, vandals who are doing our language what Genghis Khan did to his neighbours 800 years ago. They are destroying it, pillaging our punctuation, savaging our sentences, raping our vocabulary, and they must be stopped. This is, I grant you, a tall order. The texters have many more arrows in their quiver than we who defend the old way." So quite hyperbolic prescriptive viewpoint is being put forward here. And from the very beginning, we've got this discourse of war and conflict, which is drawn upon. It starts with this pre-modifying adjective relentless, which is implying that this development in language cannot be stopped. And then we've got a noun phrase, onward march, which kind of suggests that the texters themselves are like some kind of military marauding unit. We have references to historical figures. We've got Vandals, so a Germanic tribe who are historically associated with wrecking violence, and Genghis Khan as well. So the historical references there are to figures who are associated culturally in people's minds with violence. And notice the use of the first person plural pronoun there, our language. So throughout this, Humphreys is positioning us as the reader as somebody who does not use any of these text message features, who is old-fashioned and is kind of disapproving and standing apart from all those other young people who are using text messages. He draws upon syntactical repetition. So we've got the list here. We've got 4 sentence structures repeated. They are destroying it, pillaging our punctuation, savaging our sentences, raping our vocabulary. So he's really building it up and hamming it up in a way. He uses phonological devices to aid him in this. So you've got the consonants of the repetition of the plosive sounds, P, so it sounds destructive. And you've also got the sibilants of the S sounds there. So he draws upon phonological devices there to hammer home the idea of the destructiveness to the language. And then he kind of stops you short with a coordinating connective there, and. So this gives you the sense that this is a piece of conversation. It's kind of mixed mode, blended mode kind of feature. And then he gives us a deontic modal auxiliary verb, must. They must be stopped. So quite a strident viewpoint. He accepts that trying to stop people from using text messages in this way is difficult, which is why he says it's a tall order, which is an idiomatic expression. And then he says that the texters have many more arrows in their quiver. So you've got there a kind of metaphorical, idiomatic expression that he draws upon. And again, at the end there, he sort of positions the audience as people who defend the old way. So sort of we, the reader, are people who are conservative and traditional and trying to defend the ways of the language. So it's a very strongly prescriptive viewpoint, perhaps a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because there's such a use of hyperbole in there that it's consciously slightly ridiculous. So that's an interesting first text. And text B is quite a contrast to that, because this is Henry Hitchings, the marvellously alliterative name of Henry Hitchings, who produces an article with the headline, "Language Can't Stay Still, Just Listen to London." And so this seems kind of like the opposite argument to what we've just had, because it's saying that the language is constantly changing, and it's saying that we should be open to this. We should be listening to the way that people use language. And in a way, it sounds like it's going to be a bit of a kind of celebration of the diversity of different language forms in London. Let's have a read. English has prospered through assimilating terms from other languages, and engagement in London and beyond with speakers of foreign languages has enabled this, while also propagating hybrids such as Hinglish, a blend of Hindi and English. London English has long been diverse. In the 14th century, Geoffrey Chaucer absorbed words of French and Italian origin. Recycling them was a way to make his writing appear more dignified. Today, the multiplicity of tongues on our streets means scope for cross-pollination is much greater. Okay, so this is very much a kind of defense of the diversity of English and a kind of celebration. So it's kind of the opposite of what most prescriptive arguments do. He's talking about the success, first of all. So the verb here, prospered, is from the semantic field of success. So it's saying that English is a highly successful language. And the reason that he gives for this success is that it assimilates terms from other languages, i.e. it absorbs words from other languages, and it does lexical borrowing. So it's successful because of its lexical borrowing, and it's successful because of its engagement with speakers of foreign language. So, and he gives an example of this. He gives us that blend of Hindi and English, Hinglish. Then he goes on into talking about London English and how it's always been diverse. So his argument is that London has always been an incredibly international kind of city, and therefore that's why its language is so interesting to listen to. And he draws upon history in the same way as John Humphrey's drawn upon historical figures. Then Henry Hitchings does the same, but this time it's from a writer. The most famous English literature writer before Shakespeare is Geoffrey Chaucer, who was author of the Canterbury Tales. And he makes the point that Geoffrey Chaucer included words from French and Italian, and he did this in order to give a higher kind of status to his writing. So in his view, it made his writing more dignified. And so he ends the argument by saying the multiplicity of tongues in our streets means scope for cross-pollination is much greater. So it's drawing upon a kind of discourse of nature, just as we had the natural thing of hybrids on line 4. So we've got cross-pollination there, saying that basically it's a natural kind of process that's happening, and it's actually very important for the success of the language. So you've got an interesting kind of defense of the diversity of the language and a kind of descriptive rather than prescriptive viewpoints. Finally, let's go on to text C. English can absorb assault from texting, says Shannon Corrigan, who is a Times columnist. So that's interesting because it seems to be a kind of mixture of prescriptive and descriptive viewpoints. It's talking about assault from texting. So it's drawing upon the discourse of violence and war. But here it's saying English can absorb. It's using a epistemic modal auxiliary verb to say that English can actually take these changes in English. So is it descriptive? Is it going to be prescriptive? Let's read it and find out. The rise of texting is creating a generation of young people whose standards for the basic tools of communication, spelling, grammar, sentence structure, all that good stuff, are rapidly decreasing. As a space apparently without rules and regulation, it seems as though literacy standards would instantly dissolve on the internet. Text messaging also seems a likely candidate for the decline of the English language, since the physical constraints of a phone's keyboard make brevity a bonus, often via unconventional spelling. If any technological advancement is warping our children's ability to spell, so the argument goes, it must be text messaging. Now, this is quite an interesting mixture, because on the one hand, it seems to be presenting a kind of very prescriptive viewpoint, but it kind of subverts that by saying, well, apparently and it seems. So it may well be that Shannon doesn't actually believe some of the arguments that she's putting forward, certainly at the beginning of this article. She argues at the beginning that text messaging is creating a lot of young people who don't seem to be using English in a kind of standard way. And she lists spelling, grammar, sentence structure, and then that noun phrase, all that good stuff, which is a funny kind of juxtaposition, because you've got the formality of the listing of linguistic aspects here, and then you've got a very vague kind of conversational noun phrase going on there. And so she's arguing in that first paragraph that people are making this linkage between texting and decline of the language. And she's saying that, well, on the internet, apparently there aren't any rules and regulations, and therefore surely this is going to lead to a drop in literacy standards. But just be warned there, because she's got this adverbial here, this adverbial of manner, apparently, and she's saying it seems, and she's also using that slightly epistemic modal auxiliary verb would dissolve there. So although it appears like she's putting forward a prescriptive viewpoint, it seems to me like she's actually playing devil's advocate. She's actually presenting an argument that she doesn't wholly agree with, but just to put forward the counter argument at the beginning of the article. She talks about text messaging as seems a likely candidate. So we've got personification that's being used here, as if text messaging is a person. She uses the word decline, so she draws upon the discourse of decline. And she talks about the reasons why people use non-standard forms in their language, where she talks about the physical constraints of a phone's keyboard make brevity a bonus, often via unconventional spelling. So she's providing a reason why young people are using language in such unconventional and non-standard ways. And at the end, she uses a conditional sentence to say, if any technological advancement is warping our children's ability to spell, so the argument goes, it must be text messaging. And the giveaway there is, and so the argument goes, which kind of implies that she doesn't wholly agree with it, but she's just presenting the argument that's being put forward. And again, we've got this semantic field and discourse here, use of destruction, so warping our children's ability to spell. Just as on the John Humphreys one, we've got the use of the first person plural possessive pronoun our, so it's positioning the audience to be a kind of parent who was concerned about the development of the language. So it's an interesting kind of mixture, this one, and it may be that it's using language in quite an ironic way in order to present a prescriptive viewpoint. So that finishes that short kind of deconstruction of text A, text B, and text C. That's the sort of thing that you will be doing in written form in your paper 2, section B exam. Thank you.